This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi Glatstein. We're in Chodesh Adar. Mishenichnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha. Today's Shiur is dedicated by our good friend Reb Robert Yadgarav, Lili Nishmas, his grandfather, Simcha ben Yovdid Ushlomo. Began Eden Tehimenu Chasai. He should be a male Yosher for his whole family, for Simcha Sanachas, for his Toivois. Ad Bias Goel Tzedek. Amen. Okay, so the Gemara in Masechta Megillah on Daf Yudalid tells us about 12 lines from the top. Tana Rabbanan. Arbaim Ushmaina Neviim, 48 prophets. Vesheva Nevios, and 7 female prophets. And it's Navu Lahem Yisrael, prophesied for the Jewish people. V'loi Pichsu, they didn't detract. V'loi Hoisiru, they didn't add. Al Mashakasa B'Torah. Chutz Mi Mikra Megillah. The only thing the Nevi'im added to the Torah is Mikra Megillah. Now that's an astounding statement. That means Mikra and Megillah is considered a Haisafa to the Torah. That means there are many, many mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. They're not a Haisafa to the Torah. There's only one mitzvah that's considered in addition to the Torah. By the way, just as an aside, Rav Hutner explains philosophically that we know the Torah, Klal Yisrael, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu are one. So long as Amalek is in the world and Haman's in the world, God's name is minimized. Hashem's name is Chasar. It's Kiyad al Kes Ka. By the way, if you missed some of the jokes yesterday from Chaim Kanievsky, I have one more to tell you. You know, how do you say yes in Yiddish? It's Hashem's name. So they asked Reb Chaim, are you allowed to say Hashem's name? Are you allowed to say yes in Yiddish? So Reb Chaim said, yeah. Anyway. So says Rav Hutner, God's name was mitigated because of Haman and Amalek. So al Yedei the Megillah, Hashem's name became Mole. Hashem's name became Mole through the Megillah. Mamela, if God's name was magnified, the Torah needed to be magnified. So they were Moisif Mikra Megillah. And you could add, that's why the Megillah says, V'rabim me'amei haaretz misyahad many gerim. Because if Hashem's name was magnified, and the Torah was magnified, there needs to be more Jews. It all goes together. Okay. In any event, they added Mikra Megillah. The only thing they added was Mikra Megillah. Says Gemara, my Darish, what drasha did they make? Rab Chia bar Abin, Rabbi Shoben Karcha, Umamei Avdus L'Cheres Amrinan Shira. If from servitude to freedom we sing Shira, Mimisa L'Chayim Loi Kol Shekain, from death to life, all the more so. If, now Pashup Shat Rashi learns, if when we left Mitzrayim, we sang Shira al Hayam, which was Me Avdos L'Cheros, so then in the times of Haman, which is Mimisa L'Chayim Loi Kol Shekain. Now this is a very important Rashi. Rashi learns the Kavachomer is from the Oz Yashir. If when we went from servitude to freedom we sang Oz Yashir, certainly when our lives were saved in the times of Haman, we need to sing Shira, namely Megillas Esther. Okay? The Shagas Aryeh in the Turei Even has 2 kashas on Rashi, and he disagrees with Rashi's Mahalach in the Gemara. Question number 1 is, really? We're learning out a Shira from Oz Yashir? That's not Me'avdas L'Cheros. We're already free then. Then they wanted to kill us. That's Mimisa L'Chayim. That's not a Kavachoymer, that's a Mamatzino. So how could the Gemara call it Avdas L'Cheros? Furthermore, we're learning it out from Oz Yashir? They only sang Shira one time. So we should only read Megillah one time. How can you learn out? There's an annual obligation to read the Megillah. And therefore, right, so these are 2 questions. Question number 1 is, Shiras Hayam is not Me'avdas L'Cheros. Question number 2, Shiras Hayam is a one-time phenomenon. They didn't sing Shiras Hayam every single year. Therefore, the Shagas Aryeh disagrees with Rashi. Shagas Aryeh learns the Kal V'chomer is from Hallel. They said the first night of Pesach. Now, Hallel we say every year. Furthermore, that was Meyad Secheros. So the Shagas Aryeh disagrees with Rashi, but look, Ein Lanu Ela Divrei Rashi. This is how Rashi learns the Sugya. Fine. So the Gemara, now, that's the Kal V'chomer of the Gemara. I'm sure you're familiar that over the years, we've said over the Chasam Sofer. Chasam Sofer says if the source of Megillas Esther is a Kal V'chomer is what? A Dairaisa. Kal V'chomer is a Dairaisa. In that case, Megillas Esther should be Dairaisa. In fact, Chasam Sofer learns Megillas Esther is Dairaisa. According to the Shita of Ramban, that Hallel possibly could be Dairaisa, Megillas Esther could be Dairaisa. It's a Kal V'chomer. Kal V'chomer is Dairaisa. How do you know Kinyan Kesef? You have one of the Yud Gimel Midos Shatar Nedrashas for him. It's Kinyan Kesef Dairaisa D'Rabbanan. It's Dairaisa. So Mikra Megillah L'chayra should be Dairaisa. We'll get more into that soon. The Gemara asks, Yihachi Hallel Nami Nema. If so, we should say Hallel also on Purim, because just like when we left Mitzrayim, we said Hallel. So then Kal V'chomer in the times of Purim, we should say Hallel. The Gemara gives a number of answers. Answer number 1: Lefi she'ein oimrim Hallel al nes sheb'chutz haaretz. We do not say Hallel on a miracle that happened outside the land of Israel. Chanukah happened in Eretz Yisrael.
Depends which part of it. The menorah, yes.
And the war, yes.
The war was only in...
The main Milchama was in Eretz Yisrael. We only say Hallel for a miracle of Eretz Yisrael, not in Chutz Haaretz. By the way, why would that be? The Marsha says, and I think in Erchin, that what's the tachlis of Hallel? The tachlis of Hallel is to recognize Yahalelu Hashem Hashem, that it was directly through HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chutz Haaretz, Hashem does it through a malach. So it's not shaykh to say Hallel for miracles of Chutz Haaretz.
That's probably the king, so you do.
So the Gemara asks, but Yitzias Mitzrayim, Denei Sheba Chutz Haaretz, Heichi Amrinon Shira. The answer is, before the Torah was given, all lands were acceptable to say Hallel over miracles. Once the Torah was given, actually, before entry into the land of Israel, so all lands you could say Hallel. Once we entered Eretz Yisrael, you could only say Hallel on a miracle that happened in Eretz Yisrael. Says the Gemara, Ad shaloi nechnasu Yisrael la'aretz, before Klal Yisrael entered Eretz Yisrael, huchshiru kal haratzos loymar shira. All lands were kosher to say Shira. Mishenichnasu Yisrael Eretz. Once we entered Eretz Yisrael, lo yuchshiru kol haratzos. Not all lands are kosher to say Shira. By the way, the Marsha in Erchin explains what's the lumdus. If you can only say Hallel for a miracle that happens in Eretz Yisrael, because in Eretz Yisrael it's Hashem Himself doing it as opposed to Chutz Haaretz, then what's the lumdus of Mishenichnasu Yisrael Eretz lo yuchshiru kol haratzos? Kaidem shenichnasu hochshiru karatzes. Marsha says very simple. What did Hashem tell Yaakov Avinu? Anoichi ered imcha mitzrayma va'anoichi a'alcha imcha gam aloi. Before we entered, so the Rebbe Hashem was directly with us in the Golos. So when we're in the Golos, at least in Golos Mitzrayim, it was the Yad Hashem, because Rebbe Hashem was with us directly. Hashem said, Anoichi ered imcha mitzrayma. Once we entered Eretz Yisrael, then only for a miracle in Eretz Yisrael, not for a miracle of the Golos.
That only counts as the one that was in Eretz Yisrael, pretty much, right?
Well, here's a question. When else do you say Hallel for a miracle?
Right.
Because Hallel on Yom Tif is l'chayra because it's Yom Tif, not because of a nes. There are two possible causes of Hallel. There's Yom Tif and there's miracle. So what miracles do we say Hallel for in general? What miracle? So we have Chanukah, we have possibly Yitzias Mitzrayim, Okay, that's the first answer of the Gemara. Rav Nachman Amar Kriyasa Zu Helela. Rav Nachman says the reading of the Megillah is Hallel. That's answer number 2. Answer number 3, and we're going to focus on answer number 2, but just for the sake of completion. Rava Amar. Rava says, Bishlama Hasam. I understand why in the times of Yetzias Mitzrayim we said Hallel. It's not true. You could say Hallel for a miracle anyway. Anywhere. The only thing is, in order to say Hallel, you have to be free. Because we say, Hallelu Avdei Hashem. So when we left Egypt, we were the servants of Hashem. V'loy Avdei Paroi. We were not the servants of Paroi. Elahacha, but here, Hallelu Avdei Hashem v'loy Avdei Achashverosh. Akate Avdei Achashverosh Anan. We were still the subjects of Achashverosh. You can't say Hallel. True, a miracle happened, but we were still subjects of Achashverosh. So if we're subjects of Achashverosh, we can't say Hallel. So the Gemara asks that both according to Rava and Rav Nachman, there's a question, because it says that once we entered Eretz Yisrael, Lo yuchshu karatzos lemar shira. Rava said, the Gemara asks that means Rava is saying, and Rav Nachman is saying, really you could say Hallel for a miracle in Chutz La'aretz. The only thing is, Purim is Kriyas Zuhei Leila, or because we're still Avdei Achashverosh. But we learned in a Braisa that once we entered Eretz Yisrael, you're not allowed to say Hallel for a miracle that happens in Chutz La'aretz. Says the Gemara, once we're exiled, all the lands revert back to their original status that you could say Hallel for a miracle that happens there. Kivan Shagalu, once they were exiled, Chazru l'Hachshera Narishan, they returned back to their first heter. So the bottom line is, the Gemara says 3 reasons why we don't say Hallel on Purim. Number 1, because it happened in Chutz La'aretz. Number 2, the Kriya is a Hallel. Number 3, because we're still Avdei Achashverosh. Comes the Heilige Chasam Sofer. By the way, we can't mention the Chasam Sofer without saying over the special haftacha of the Chasam Sofer. Chasam Sofer is brought in Jerusalem, Va'agada is Chasam Sofer, that he has a Kabbalah from his Rebbe, Reb Mendele Lilig, who is a Rav in Frankfurt am Main, who has a tradition from the Shev Yaakov, that many people do a lot of good things on Purim. Everybody hears the Megillah 2 times. Everyone eats the Suda. Everybody gives matanos avyonim, mishlayach manos. By the way, these are mitzvahs. Mitzvahs trichas kavana. So you have to remember, before you eat Sudas Purim, to be mechavein, to be mekayim the mitzvah of Sudas Purim. Before you hear the Megillah, you have to have kavana, to be mekayim the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. Before you give mishlayach manos and matanos avyonim, you have to be mechavein, to be mekayim the mitzvah. Plus there are other mitzvahs. Now the most important mitzvah of Purim is what? Matanos avyonim. Matanos avyonim is by far the most important mitzvah. The Rambam says, "Mutav adam laharvas matanos avyonim yoiser misudasai she'ein lecha simcha mefayara." There's no more glorious simcha ela liyos mesameach leiv nidkan v'leiv nishbarim. So Bachrim spend the whole day collecting money. Okay, it's better than other things, but it's not the ikar mitzvah of Purim. The ikar mitzvah of Purim is to be mesameach the downtrodden, to be mesameach the umlalim. To be mesameh. Now, supporting Torah is a very nice mitzvah. But the ikar mitzvah of Purim is mesameach the downtrodden. There's also a mitzvah of chayv inishal besume. One has to become rejoiced, ad lo yada. But everybody knows that the Ramah holds that one is mekayim the mitzvah. You drink ktsas yoser milimudai, a little bit more. The joke is you should drink more than you learn. So if you don't learn too much, you don't have to drink too much either. But ktsas yoser milimudai, more than usual. So if you have a hard time drinking, 3% the ayin kal on Pesach night, then you could take 1 ounce, and then you go to sleep, and you're yotzei the mitzvah. But chas v'shalom, to drink excessive alcohol and permanently damage your liver, that would not be a smart thing to do. The same way you're mechalel Shabbos. I once heard Rav Miller say that what's the source in the Torah that you have to exercise? It's a mitzvah d'oraisa to exercise. What's the mitzvah? It says, it's Parsha. If you're mechalel Shabbos to save someone's life so that he could keep many Shabbosos, Certainly you have to exercise so you could keep many Shabbosos. If you could even be Mechalo Shabbos to live longer, certainly you need to exercise to live longer. So I asked Miller, do you have to exercise every day? He said, every day. I said, even Shabbos? I asked him this. He said, even Shabbos you have to exercise. You have to walk. I said, in Slabodka, do they exercise every day? He told me, in Slabodka, they exercise every day because the dining room was very far away from the yeshiva. Rav Miller in his heyday walked 90 minutes a day. Anyway, it's a daraisa, it's a kal v'chomer. If you have to be mechalo Shabbos, okay. But any event, but there's another important mitzvah on Purim. You know what the mitzvah is? We have a tradition that anyone who learns Torah between the Megillah of the Laila and the Megillah of the Yom, muftach lo shu ben olam haba. Muftach lo shu ben olam haba. Okay. Anyway, so now I want to tell you over the Kasha Chasam Sofer. This is in Shaus Tshuvos Arachayim Siman Nun Aleph. He says, according to the Gemara's answer, that Kriyasa Zuhei Leila. Okay, which it seems like we follow. There's a psak of the Eliyah Rabbah. The Eliyah Rabbah says that when you bench goimel, you need to be standing. Why? Because it's a type of Hallel. And Hallel has to be said standing. And the Gemara and Megillah darshans, why does Hallel have to be standing? Hallelu avdei Hashem ha'oimdim beveis Hashem. Got to be standing when you say Hallel. Does one have to be standing when they lay in Megillah? Not to l'chadchila for sure. But is it me'ikar hadin? No. Ask the Chasam Sofer, I don't understand. According to the Eliyah Rabbah, that you have to be standing for goimel because it's a form of Hallel. And that's why goimel is only b'yoyim and not b'layla. So according to the Eliyah Rabbah, why are you not chayiv to stand when you read the Megillah? That's a Chasam Sofer's kasha. Because Megillah is Hallel. That's a Chasam Sofer's kasha. Why are you not obligated to stand? I know we do stand, but that's only for kavod hatzibur. If you're laning for an individual, it's more lenient. You could possibly sit. It's still l'chadchila to stand. But, by the way, the proof is, I have a question. Who has to read the Megillah? Every Jew, yeah? But only one guy is reading the Megillah. Oh, shoymei ha'ka'ina. Okay, that's very nice. So it's like I'm saying, so how am I allowed to sit? The answer is, because you don't have to stand for Mikra Megillah. So don't say, oh, everywhere, yeah, but we do stand. No, we don't. We don't stand. The second, everyone sits down. What do you mean? It's Hallel. Hallel, you have to stand. Hallel, ha'im deveis Hashem. That's Chasam Sofer's kasha. You know what? Ein beis hamedrash b'li chidush. I've seen this a few times. I never thought that's a very good way to say it. Because people always say, well, we do stand. No, we don't. We dafka sit. We sit for Mikra Megillah. Okay? Let's try an answer. You ever see the Sefer? Yemei HaPurim, Rav David Kohen. David Kohen is Rosh Yeshiva of Chevron. Now the Yemei HaPurim is like 400 pages bigger. I got this Sefer in 7th grade. In 7th grade, we had a very good Rebbe, Rabbi Glatstein, and first of all, used to get points, and whoever had the most points was the Talmid HaChodesh. Yeah, but half the class was the Talmid HaChodesh. Top 10 guys. So I think that was a very, thinking about it, 10. It was like a very high percentage of the class. It wasn't 50%. But it was more than 25%. Okay. How do you get points? First of all, the Rebbe would give shiur. He would call on people randomly. Who has the place? If you had the place, you got a point. If you didn't have the place, it could be you lost the point. I don't remember the details. Then the Rebbe would give shiur. After recess was chavrusa time. The way chavrusa time worked was 5-minute sidarim. 5 minutes sidarim, and then 2-minute breaks. And if you learned during the 5-minute Seder without conversation, you got a point. And he could come back 20 minutes later. So there were 4, he would say, how many points did he get? 3, 4, right? No batala. So it was training in Retzifas. Because sometimes when you learn, people think, learning, it's learning. Did you hear the new song that they came out last night? That just because the singer is Jewish, it doesn't make it Talmud Torah. So it had to be, with uninterrupted learning. Then every Shabbos, you had an avodah. And if you did the avodah, you got a point. So I remember one avodah was, you had to be the first to greet somebody else. Actually, you had to be makdim shalom l'chol. You were allowed like 3 misses. Like, somebody tapped you on the shoulder, good Shabbos. You were allowed 3 misses. And this 7th grade, it was very good chinuch. Anyway, so I got this sefer. I don't think I was able to look at it for good 10 years. But this is an amazing sefer. Over here he brings, in Maimer Yotes, I assume by now it's a different number, he brings a very interesting shaila. Let's say you live in a city and there's no Megillah. L'chayra, what should the halacha be? You should say Hallel on Purim. If the only reason you don't say Hallel is because Kriyasa Zu Hilila, L'chayra, you should say Hallel on Purim if there's no Megillah. With the bracha. Right? It's a bigger Hallel than Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is not even D'Rabbanan, Rosh Chodesh is Minhag. Sfardim don't say bracha on Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. Some do?
Sudur has it.
I don't think they should. Not only that, I want to tell you a big chiddush. Even Ashkenazim, it's not pashut you can make a bracha. That's why you have to be very careful to say Hallel b'tzibur on Rosh Chodesh. Because there's more shitas in the Rishonim that b'tzibur you could say Hallel. Therefore, if you come late to shul on Rosh Chodesh, normally you start from the beginning of Shacharis. But if they're saying Hallel, you go straight to Hallel. It's not pashut that Ashkenazi could say a bracha. We paskin, we do. But you should be careful to daven with the minyan. Of course, all the time, especially Rosh Chodesh. There are even situations where if you're middle of Psukei de Zimra, we say, middle of Psukei de Zimra, don't get involved in the shaila of whether you should say bracha and Hallel. Use Baruch Shamar and Yishtabach as your beginning and end bracha for Hallel. Say Baruch Shamar, say Hallel with the tzibur, and say Yishtabach the bracha, and don't get involved. It's a very big shaila. Comes the Birkei Yosef. Who's the Birkei Yosef? The Birkei Yosef and Reb Simcha ben Yovdid have the same yard site. They're Yod Aleph Adar. The Chida who wrote the Birkei Yosef. Now the Chida in his travels went to various libraries, and there he saw the Meiri in manuscript form. We have not had access to the Meiri until this century. The Chida memorized all the Meiris he saw. He says, according to the reason in the Gemara, that Kriyasa Zu Leila, if there's no Megillah, you say Hallel. That's the psak of the Meiri. Says the Chida, I disagree. Why? Because Rava says there's another reason not to say Hallel. Akati Avdei Achashver Shanan. Don't say Hallel. The halacha is like Rava. Rava is the Basra. Yeah? Rava is the Basra. So we go like Rava. But in the Machzik Bracha, the Chida changes. And the Chida writes, the Ikar Tam is Kriyasa Zu Leila like the Meiri. And then the Chida retracted that in fact you do say Hallel on Purim. The Chida paskins, you say Hallel on Purim if you're in a place with no Megillah. Comes the Shari Tshuva and Simon Tafrei Tzadi Gimel, and he says, in my opinion, it's not pashut that Chachamim were never misakin Hallel on Purim. Because the reading of the Megillah is Hallel, they weren't misakin Hallel. But it's very hard to understand the Shari Tshuva. What do you mean they weren't misakin? This is not a D'Rabbanan we're talking about here. It's Doiraisa. I would understand the Sharei Tshuva if Mikra Megillah was D'Rabbanan, but there's a Kal V'chomer! Kal V'chomer is D'Oraisa! So Mikra Megillah is D'Oraisa! And Hallel should be D'Oraisa! And the only reason we don't say Hallel is because Mikra Megillah takes the place. But if there's no Mikra Megillah, what do you mean the Chachamim were not Mesake in Hallel? What about the D'Oraisa Kal V'chomer? Mamei Avdus L'cheiros Amrinon Shira Mimisa L'chayim Loi Kol Shekein. You hear my kasha? What does the Sharei Tshuva mean? The Chachamim were not Mesake in Hallel. Loit Chasam Sofer is a D'Oraisa, you have to say Hallel. You know what loit means? Loit is a yeshivish word for according to. You hear the question? The question is, how do we define what would be the obligation to say Hallel had there not been, if we don't read the Megillah? L'chayra, Chasam Sofer would learn it's D'Oraisa. So then what do you mean the Chachamim were not Mesake in Hallel? There's a D'Oraisa to say Hallel. You ready for this? There's a Netziv, a very important Netziv. The Netziv is in the Hamek She'ela. And the Netziv vehemently disagrees with the Chasam Sofer. And the Netziv says, with all due respect to the Chasam Sofer, he says, let's think for a moment. Chasam Sofer wants to argue that Mikra Megillah is D'Oraisa Kal V'chomer from Shiras Hayam. Says the Heilige Netziv, yeah, I agree with you that a Kal V'chomer is D'Oraisa, but it can't be stronger than the source. When did the Jewish people sing Shiras Hayam? In year 1. So we can make a Kal V'chomer in year 1 that Mikra Megillah is D'Oraisa. And I'll concede in year 1 Mikra Megillah is D'Oraisa. But in subsequent years, the Kal V'chomer is reduced to Ma Me Avdos L'cheros Amrinon Shira in year 1. Mimisa Chaim, we will read Mikra Megillah in year 1. And if you want to continue it, then it would only be D'Rabbanan.
Did the Jews sing Shira the second year, third year?
No, they didn't sing Shira. I mean, we do it in shul as like a zecher. What? Again, the Kal V'chomer, according to Rashi, is not from Hallel of Yitzias Mitzrayim, it's from Shiras Hayam. So Shiras Hayam is only b'shas the miracle. The Netziv is medayik in the lashon of the Shiltis. The Shiltis says, "Be'idna denisa chayiv loymar shira." At the time of a miracle, you're obligated to sing shira. So the Kal V'chomer would be, if when they crossed the sea, which was from Avdos L'cheros, they sang Shira at that time, then in the times of Purim, they need to sing Shira at that time. But for subsequent years, it would only be D'Rabbanan. And in that case, the Rabbanan were never Mesakein Hallel, like the Sharei Tshuva was saying. In a the Rabbanan said that just like, since in year 1 they said Megillah D'Oraisa, in subsequent years they continued it Midrabbanan. Now, what would be if you don't have a Megillah? The Chida would argue, well then you should say Hallel. The Sharei Tshuva says no. Because Hallel takes the place of Mikra Megillah, they were never Mesakein Hallel on Purim. Now, I want to share with you 2 Chidushim Nairam. If you look in the Gemara in Shabbos, the Gemara in Shabbos that talks about the miracle of Chanukah, the Gemara says they found the oil, it was supposed to last for 1 day, it lasts for 8 days. The Gemara, I'm going to leave out 2 words, and then I'm going to put it in. Kavam va'asam yamim toivim b'halel v'hoida. But the Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara says, L'shana ha'acheres, in year 2, they established Chanukah for Hallel and Hoida. Why not year 1? Yeah.
Did they have control of Eretz Yisrael at that time?
Yeah. According to Netziv, it's Ayam Menorah why they didn't make a Kviyas in year 1. In year 1, we don't need the legislation of the Chachamim. Chanukah is D'Oraisa in year 1. Kal V'chomer. Uma me'avdos l'cheres amrinon shira mimisa l'chayim loy kol shekein. So year 1, you don't need the Rabbanon to be kavam v'asam. It happens on its own. It's D'Oraisa. Year 2 is when we need the rabbis.
So Mikra Megillah is not a Dairaisa.
According to the Netziv.
Right, from the Netziv.
Correct. Definitely not.
But it doesn't, but we don't have, where's the zero?
By Hanukkah?
No, by Megillah.
Where's the Gzer of what?
Say Hallel.
So we're saying that since in year 2, Hanukkah, reading the Megillah is only D'Rabbanan. Now there's a Chi of D'Rabbanan of Hallel as well, from the same Kavachomer. That's continued to subsequent years. But because Hallel takes the place, if you don't have a Megillah, they weren't Koiveya Hallel on Purim. If you're dealing in the Dairaisa realm, then if you're not reading the Megillah, the Dairaisa mandates, the Kavachomer mandates, you say Hallel. But if there is no Dairaisa, it's only a Kaviyas of the Rabbanan, then you could argue, because normally you have a Megillah, they never enacted Hallel on Purim. They didn't make the Kaviyas in the first place.
And hearing the Megillah is going to be...
According to the Netziv, hearing the Megillah would only be the Rabbanan. The Chasam, okay, now. The Chasam Sofer didn't know this kasha. It's a Pasha kasha on the Chasam Sofer. How could you make a Kava Chomer? They only sang Shiras Hayam in year 1. So I want to share with you a gold mine. The Chasam Sofer talks about this Kava Chomer in many places. In Yoredeya, Sivan Reish Lamed Gimel, when the Chasam Sofer brings the Kava Chomer, listen to this. He says, K'moi shetziva ba'Pesach l'saper yitzias Mitzrayim hachenami by Purim mimaves l'chayim chayiv loimer shira b'peh. Chasam Sofer is ba'varning our kasha. Chasam Sofer says, I know you could ask on the technical Kavachomer of the Gemara that Shiras Hayam was only in year 1. Yeah, but that's not the only thing we do on Pesach. On Pesach, we're Mesaper B'Yitzias Mitzrayim. What, in year 1 only? We're Mesaper B'Yitzias Mitzrayim every year. So let's make a Kavachomer. If you're Mechuyev to be Mesaper B'Yitzias Mitzrayim every year, Midairaisa on Pesach, that's only Me'avdos L'Cheiros. By the way, this in a way answers the Shagas Aryeh's question also. Shagas Aryeh says, what do you mean? Shiras Hayam was only in year 1, and it was not Me'avdos L'Cheiros. Yeah, but Tzibur Yitzias Mitzrayim is Me'avdos L'Cheiros, and it was every year. So if you make the Kavachomer from Tzibur Yitzias Mitzrayim, then you have an annual source to read the Megillah every single year. Let's go back to the Netziv for the moment, and let's talk about standing by Hallel. That means in subsequent years, reading the Megillah is only D'Rabbanan. And we say it could be the Chachamim never even legislated a Hallel in the first place. Should you have to stand for Mikra Megillah? The Chasam Sofer is asking, well, if the Mikra Megillah is Hallel, you should have to stand because this is the Hallel. But is it possible to say the same way if you don't have a Megillah, the rabbis never legislated a Hallel, they also never legislated that the Mikra Megillah in subsequent years takes on the requirements of Hallel. It's not that Mikra Megillah is the Hallel in subsequent years. It's that since you're reading the Megillah, you're exempt from Hallel. You know, it's an interesting idea. Rabbi Glatstein says, Rav Hutner brings it from Rabbi Glatstein. If you have to say Hallel, what do you mean Kriyasa Zuhelela? Reading the Megillah is the Hallel. How's it the Hallel? Say Hallel. What's the problem with Hallel? It's too long? It's not. We have many say the Hallel. What's the problem? We learn Shiurim and we say Hallel. We learn Megillah and we learn Koyal and Hallel. So learn the Megillah and say Hallel. Listen to this vart. It says, the miracle of Purim was hidden. It was behind the scenes. So the Hallel should be corresponding to that, a hidden Hallel. Where the way we say, the same way, where is Hashem in the Megillah? His name, you can't point to any place and say, here's Hashem, here's Hashem, here's Hashem. Where's Hashem? Stringing it all together. The whole story. So the way we say a Hallel is, we're not going to say a pointed Hallel, this is Hashem. We're going to say a hidden Hallel. And the hidden Hallel is, we say the story, and hidden from the story is a praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, so let's summarize. Bottom line is, you should go to a shul that has a Megillah. Don't be in the desert for Purim. What?
Klaf? It has to be klaf.
Klaf. It has to be Megillah written. We darshan. Divrei Shalom ve'emes. The Gemara darshans ka'amita shel Torah. So try to avoid cruises and being in the desert, Sahara Desert for Purim. That's the first thing that comes out. If you happen to be in a spot where there's no Megillah, should you say Hallel? The Chida is Mesupik. The Meiri says you do say Hallel. The Chida says no, but also in the Birkei Yosef, in Machzor Bracha says yes. Sha'ar Tshuva says no. I would assume that if you're in a place where there's no Megillah, you don't say Hallel. Okay, next. The Chasam Sofer makes the case that commemorating miracles that where Hashem saved our life is the Eiraisa. Now I want to explain this carefully just for 1 second. And that is, Chasam Sofer doesn't mean that Mamish Mikra Megillah is the Eiraisa. Listen carefully. Because you can't make a Kavachomer if when we left Mitzrayim we sang Shiras Hayam, so when Hashem saved us on Purim, so what, we should say Shiras Hayam. No, the Kavachomer is you have to make a memorial for the miracle. The rabbis come and say how to remember it. Midoraisa, something needs to be done. Midrabanan, they select how to do it. And the reason why I say this is like this. Here you have an unaffiliated Jew. Is there any value in him writing an electric menorah at the wrong time, or putting up a happy Hanukkah sign? And the answer is it has tremendous value. Why? Because he's fulfilling the da'iraisa of remembering the miracle. He's not fulfilling it k'hilchasai, obviously. And there's a shaila in Minchas Chinuch that once the Chachamim legislate how to be Mekayim something, if you don't do it their way, it could be you're not Mekayim even on a da'iraisa level, but at least there is some toyeles in remembering a miracle according to the Chasam Sofer's da'iraisa. Again, the Netziv argues, and the Netziv says, since the Kavachomer is from Shiras Hayam, the Da'iraisa should only be in year 1. We brought how, according to Chasam Sofer, even in subsequent years it could be Da'iraisa because you can make the Kavachomer from Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. Rabbi Chanani ben Akasha Omer, Ratzah Yisroch Zagis So, Lefikach Hir B'lam Torah Mitzvah Shenemar, Adonai Chafetz Siman Sekoy, Yagdil Torah V'Yadir.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.